What scientific fact scares the absolute shit out of you? The Pacific Northwest has a 600-mile-long subduction zone that is approximately 70 years overdue for a 8.8 to 9.2 magnitude earthquake, and nothing on that coast is built to withstand that. There has never been a strong earthquake on that coastline since European contact, because the last major earthquake happened in 1700. Unlike Japan, which had a comparable earthquake in 2011, the PNW isn't ready for it and things aren't built to withstand what's coming. Someday soon, Seattle, Vancouver, Portland, and Victoria are all going to lurch 6 feet inland, shake violently for 5 to 7 minutes, and then get hit with a 100-foot-tall tsunami. It is projected to kill tens of thousands, displace millions, and wipe out trillions of dollars of wealth, the second largest humanitarian disaster in North American history, second only to Haiti. And it seems like people are just pretending this doesn't exist. Scientific literature's conclusion on Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases, in general, is that the diseases start decades before the first obvious symptoms and that we need to treat them at this stage. When you exhibit obvious symptoms, it's too late, your brain is already mush. If you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 65, you had the disease since your early 40s at least. And you experienced very mild symptoms but didn't notice them. And your brain fought like hell to compensate for the deficit. When you get diagnosed, your brain is already very severely damaged and will never recover from the deficit. There is nothing more scary to me than Alzheimer's. Probably one of the worst ways to go in my mind. Forgetting who you are, who your family is, losing your ability to function independently. It's one of the scariest thoughts to me. I would rather get cancer than go through Alzheimer's. There's a very interesting study on nuns with Alzheimer's. They all donated their brains to science after they died, and 1/3 of them had clear signs of Alzheimer's, but very few of them showed symptoms. It's thought that their constant engagement in activities and social interaction formed new neuronal pathways that slowed the effects of Alzheimer's. I don't remember the names of the authors, I did see it on David Eagleman with the brain, though. This scares me more than anything. I have a chronic illness that affects my autonomic nervous system, and one of the symptoms is cognitive dysfunction. I constantly wonder how much of my brain continues to be damaged over time, and since my illness has no cure, there's not a damn thing I can do about it. I'm only 40. I think what is underestimated is nutrition. Shitty sugar-heavy processed foods are bad. Research suggests it's also a vascular disease, and with that related to CVD/type 2 diabetes. Type 2 falls into sour description too. Diagnosis comes way too late, at the end stage of the disease. You likely had high insulin and then elevated sugar for at least 2 decades before that. Type 2 is hence very much more common than we actually know, and I'm pretty sure there is a strong link to Alzheimer's. https://www.ncbi.nlm.nih.gov/pmc/article/pmc4265876. If you are older, have a beer belly, you most likely already type 2, producing way too much insulin and having elevated blood sugar for prolonged times. The missing evidence, as said, is that way too few get a type 2 diagnosis in time, so many die of Alzheimer but without a formal type 2 diagnosis. The standard oral glucose test is usually done wrong, as in only blood sugar is measured but not insulin levels. Your pancreas will keep your blood sugar low for decades, but the high insulin wreaks havoc already then for decades. And one of the most prevalent studies, that most of the current Alzheimer's treatments are treating, are a complete and total fraud. I just got out of the depression hole I was in after discovering everywhere at the end of time, so I refuse to think about Alzheimer's. My great-grandma had it, my grandma had it, so I'm just waiting in line at this point. I know the incidence rate is lower in men, but not sure if that'll save me. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's genetic. You won't know that you have it. When you know that you have it, there is zero recourse. It will eat holes in your brain and you'll die. That, and fatal familial insomnia, also genetic. One of your parents woke up one day and couldn't fall back asleep until they died, having suffered rapidly progressing neural degeneration. And it tends to set in around midlife, so you spend every day waking up knowing it might be the last time. You find it hard to build relationships and have a family because you know it's not a matter of if, only when. But you know you're not gonna see your golden years. Only about 5 to 15% of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease cases are related to inherited genetic mutation of the prion protein, fatal familial insomnia and Gertzmann-Straussler-Scheinker syndrome. 85% of cases are sporadic, aka it's just random bad luck that one of your prion proteins misfolded and then goes from there. Which TBH is much scarier because it can happen to anyone. I assume everyone who has trouble sleeping is paranoid about this. But yeah, you probably don't have it. If you start getting stalked by shadows and you feel like you're in a waking nightmare after not sleeping though, consider going to the hospital. You'll be fine, soldier. We didn't really understand the risk until the 1990s when seismic hazard researchers found evidence in flood deposits in deep water bays and a drowned forest in an estuary in the PNW that were unexplained. Then a researcher found a Japanese historical record for a tsunami without an associated earthquake matching tree ring dates from the tree stumps in drowned forest. My grandfather died of CJD. It was horrible and relatively slow. Years later, I was filling out the questionnaire at a blood drive event at work, and it asked if anyone in your family had passed due to CJD or other prion diseases. Answering yes disqualified me from donating, and they shooed me out like a leper. I hadn't considered that my end could potentially be the same as my grandfather's end until that moment. That's highly unlikely though. I am from Turkey. We had a devastating earthquake last month and I was in one of the affected areas. The shaking lasted for a minute and a half. The shaking never seems to stop. You feel like it will get weaker, but it gets stronger and more violent. You hear a weird noise coming from everywhere, making the experience even more terrifying. Maybe you try to get up, but the ground under you is shaking, you can't even keep your balance and try to go to a safe place. If this is what a 7.8 is like, I can't imagine what 8.8 to 9.2 do. And the buildings aren't ready for it? Do they just don't value human life? To be fair, I know all too well that this exists. It's just that all I can do to prep is know what to do when my house is rubble, and there won't be power, water, or food for weeks. Knowledge of what to do after an event is much more important than expecting the event. On the note of the Great Cascadia earthquake, when the 1700 earthquake hit, there was a major volcanic eruption, CX cone, in the region of the fault line that preceded the earthquake and killed thousands. This is noteworthy because Mount Rainier is a huge threat to the Seattle metropolitan area, and Mount Baker is a huge threat to Vancouver. There are millions of people who live within range of either volcano. And I'm moving to Seattle in a month. Volcanoes. I'm already planning my emergency bag. So many people don't know that the Cascades and the Olympics formed because of the subduction zone. The Cascades formed volcanically and the Olympics are a crumple zone. They're gorgeous and massive and testaments to the relentless march of plate tectonics across deep time. Stopping to think about that is indeed terrifying. I remember reading the book Cascadia's Fault, which came out a couple of years before that famous viral article did that disseminated the knowledge far more widely. That freaked the shit out of me, too, but it also fascinated me that we'd come so far in our knowledge. And honestly, the geological discoveries and realizations we've made the last 20 plus years are astounding. Cascadia Fault System. Public awareness that Yellowstone is one gigantic volcano. CT scans of the Earth revealed pieces of unmelted oceanic crust floating around in the mantle. These pieces can trigger earthquakes above and contribute to fault lines forming mid-plate. Existing fault lines in those pieces of crust can reactivate, also creating quakes above. There are some really powerful volcanoes that exist and exhibit unique behavior because of these mantle pieces, like Mt. Paichu/Chinbaishan on the China/S Korea border. The mantle isn't liquid, but plastic rock. It's fascinating and terrifying at the same time. We're all just along for the ride in the end. Or instead they will lurch 2 inches dozens of times instead. There is no guarantee that future earthquakes will be single large event, a million years could go by before that happens again. I am in the PNW and I am the few that aren't pretending and have an emergency backpack bag set up for me to go at any time. Those of us who know this can happen are terrified and try not to think about it, knowing our infrastructure can't handle it. Puts on music and thinks happy thoughts. Reality is surreal AF. We live in an environment where supercharged bolts of plasma spontaneously appear in the sky and can fry you to a crisp and explode you in a millisecond and disappear without a trace. Clouds can leave the sky and touch the ground at 200 plus mph and pull you hundreds of feet in the air or flatten your town, again gone without a trace. There is a microverse that exists within our environment that holds microscopic murderers, constantly attacking your body for any points of weakness, all while you go unaware of the silent threats. Consciousness is the greatest mystery of all. My personal perception creates my reality. There is no way to prove any if it is real, because no one could ever experience your version of reality. Life could be one big hallucination. Even our 5 senses are only able to interpret pieces of our environment to create a version of perspective and experience. The thought of any of these scares TF out of me.